The night was colder than anyone had expected. Snow fell from the sky like endless sheets of white, covering the streets, the roofs, and even the trees that stood bare in the bitter season. The town was silent, almost lifeless, except for the crunch of weak footsteps pressing into the snow. A young girl walked alone, her small figure almost hidden in the heavy storm. She wore a thin, torn shawl that did little to protect her from the freezing wind. Her hair was damp with melted snow, sticking to her pale face. In her arms she clutched a small bundle, wrapped tightly in old cloth. Inside that bundle was her baby, her only reason for walking through the storm, her only reason to keep breathing when her body begged her to collapse. The baby whimpered, his tiny cries cutting through the silence of the night. The girl pressed him closer to her chest, whispering words of comfort even though her lips were trembling and numb. "Shh. It's okay, my little one. Mama is here. I won't let anything happen to you," she murmured, though deep inside fear twisted her heart. She didn't know how much longer she could keep that promise. Her feet were raw from walking barefoot for hours. The thin sandals she had once worn had torn apart days ago, leaving only strips of cloth tied around her ankles. Every step on the frozen ground sent pain shooting up her legs, but she did not stop. She knew stopping meant death, not just for her, but for the innocent baby she carried. The storm grew harsher. Snowflakes stuck to her eyelashes, blinding her. The wind howled like a beast, pushing against her fragile frame, as though the world itself wanted to break her spirit. She tightened her hold on the baby and forced her body forward, step after painful step. She had knocked on doors earlier that evening, desperate for help. Families had peeked out, their faces filled with pity at first, but the moment they saw the baby, their expressions turned cold. Some muttered that they had no space. Others slammed the doors without a word. Each rejection was like a knife cutting into her heart. She wasn't only fighting the storm, she was fighting a world that had already decided to turn its back on her. Tears burned her eyes, though they froze almost instantly on her cheeks. She thought of the past, of how her life had once been normal. There had been a time when she laughed, when her parents smiled at her, when she dreamed of school, friends, and a future. But that life had ended the day she was cast out. Left alone, unwanted, abandoned for mistakes that weren't only hers. Now all she had was the tiny life in her arms. She looked down at the baby's innocent face, half asleep, lips quivering from the cold. Her heart ached. She knew he deserved better. He deserved warmth, love, and a safe place to sleep. And yet all she could give him was the strength of her arms and her endless prayers. Her body shivered violently. She thought of stopping just for a moment, just to rest. The snow around her looked so soft, like a bed waiting for her tired soul. But then, the baby stirred, letting out a weak cry that pierced her like a spark of fire. She shook her head, forcing herself awake. "No, I can't, not now, not ever," she whispered. The storm could break her body, but it could not break a mother's love. In the distance, through the white blur of the snow, she noticed a faint glow. Lights. A house. Or maybe more than a house. Her heart leaped with a fragile hope. She stumbled forward, half running, half falling, her arms trembling but still holding the baby tight. Every step toward the light felt like a step toward salvation. As she got closer, she realized it was not a small house, but a mansion. Its windows glowed golden against the night, and smoke rose gently from tall chimneys, promising warmth inside. The gates stood tall and strong, a barrier between her broken world and the world of wealth she could never reach. Her knees buckled as she reached the gates, and she collapsed in the snow. The baby whimpered again, his tiny hands moving weakly. Summoning the last of her strength, she looked up at the grand home before her. "Please," she whispered to the night, though no one could hear her. "Please let me in." For him. The storm roared around her, but inside those gates was warmth, fire, and life. She pressed her forehead to the cold iron bars, tears freezing on her skin. She did not care about herself anymore. She did not care if she lived or died. All she wanted, everything she begged for, was a little shelter, just enough to keep her baby alive through the night. And in that moment of weakness, with snow burying her trembling figure, fate began to turn. For someone inside that mansion would soon hear her cries, someone whose answer would change her life forever. The snowstorm raged on, but the girl's eyes stayed locked on the golden glow in the distance. It was not just a flicker. It was steady, warm, and alive. Hope. the kind of hope she hadn't felt in months. With shaking legs, she pushed herself up from the frozen ground, clutching her baby tighter. The child whimpered, his breath shallow, but the faint light made her whisper softly to him. "Hold on, my love. Just a little more. There is warmth ahead." Step by step, she dragged her weary body forward. Each movement was torture. Her knees felt like they might snap, and her lungs burned from breathing in the icy wind. Still, the lights drew her forward like a promise. The closer she came, the clearer it became that this wasn't an ordinary house. The mansion stood tall, like something out of a fairy tale. Its roof lined with snow, but its windows glowing like beacons in the darkness. Thick iron gates surrounded the property, and tall trees swayed in the storm around it. The house looked strong, powerful, untouchable, a place made for kings, not for a poor girl carrying a starving child. She stopped just before the gates, staring up at the grand sight. For a moment she felt small, smaller than she had ever felt before. What right did she have to even stand here? Her torn shawl, her cracked skin, her dirt-stained face, all of it screamed that she did not belong. Inside those golden windows were people who lived with warmth, food, and laughter. And here she was, begging for scraps of mercy. Her lips trembled, not just from the cold, but from fear. Would they throw her away just like everyone else? Would they tell her she was not worthy of shelter? The thought made her heart sink, but she knew she could not turn back, not with her baby's life hanging in the balance. With trembling hands, she reached for the cold iron bars of the gate and shook them weakly. Her voice cracked as she called out, "Hello? Please, someone, help us." Her words were carried away by the wind, but she did not stop. She cried louder, her tears freezing against her skin. A small light flicked on near the entrance, and a man stepped forward. He was a guard, tall and broad, wrapped in a heavy coat. His eyes narrowed as he saw her figure kneeling in the snow. "Who are you?" he barked, his voice hard and sharp. The girl's heart leapt in fear, but she forced herself to speak. "Please, sir, my baby. We have nowhere to go. Just one night. I beg you." She lifted the child slightly, showing his tiny face, pale and weak. The guard frowned, glancing back at the glowing mansion. "This is not a place for beggars," he said coldly. His words struck her like a blade. She felt her strength slipping away, but she clasped her hands together desperately. "I'm not asking for food or gold," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I only need a roof. Just a roof so my child doesn't freeze tonight. I will leave by morning." "I swear," the guard shifted uneasily. He had seen beggars before, desperate faces asking for coins or bread. But there was something different about this girl. Her eyes were hollow yet fierce, her body trembling yet unbroken. She wasn't asking for herself. She wasn't begging for riches. She was begging for her baby. Still, his duty was clear. "I can't let strangers in. You should leave," he muttered, though his voice carried less certainty now. The girl's knees gave out and she fell into the snow, clutching her baby close. She pressed her forehead against the frozen ground. "Please!" "For his life, not mine," she cried, her sobs carried by the howling wind. The guard froze. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to do. His orders were strict. No strangers were ever allowed into the mansion. The master was a private man, known for his coldness. But this scene, the young mother crying in the snow, the weak baby in her arms, it was something that pierced even a hardened heart. And then it happened. From the highest window of the mansion, a curtain moved. A shadow appeared behind the glass, watching. The young billionaire himself had seen the scene unfold. His sharp eyes locked on the poor girl at the gate, her body shaking as she begged. He could have turned away. He could have ordered the guard to throw her out into the storm. After all, he was not known for kindness. His empire was built on strength, not mercy. Yet something in the sight made him pause. Perhaps it was the way she clung to the baby, refusing to let the storm take him. Perhaps it was the sound of her voice, so broken yet so full of love. Whatever it was, it reached a place in his heart he thought was long dead. The girl, unaware she was being watched, whispered one last prayer. Her lips barely moved as she said, "God, if there is even a drop of kindness in this world, let someone hear me tonight." The storm raged on, but inside the golden mansion, a decision was forming, one that would change both of their lives forever. The girl's body shook as she clung to the cold iron bars of the gate. Snow piled around her knees, soaking her torn clothes, but she didn't move. The only thing that kept her upright was the tiny weight of the baby in her arms. His faint whimpers were softer now, weaker, and that terrified her more than the storm. The guard stood on the other side of the gate, torn between duty and humanity. His breath came out in thick clouds as he shook his head. "I told you cannot stay here," he said, trying to sound firm, though his voice wavered. Her head lifted slowly, her eyes red from the cold and tears. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking into pieces. "I am not asking for me. Let him live. Just one night. Just until the storm passes. I will leave in the morning." The guard swallowed hard, looking away. He had worked at the mansion for years and had seen many people try to take advantage of his master's wealth. But this girl, she was different. Her hands trembled, her lips were blue, and yet she didn't once ask for food, money, or comfort. Her plea was only for her baby. She pulled the bundle closer and unwrapped it just a little, showing the child's face. His cheeks were pale, his eyelids heavy, his breath shallow. The girl pressed her lips against his forehead, tears dripping onto his skin. "Don't sleep, my angel. Stay with me. Please stay with me," she whispered, rocking him gently in the snow. The guard's chest tightened. Something about the sight reminded him of his own mother. Years ago, when she had fought to keep him alive through poverty, he wanted to look away, but he couldn't. "Go to the church in town," he said finally, his voice low. "They take in people like you." The girl shook her head desperately. "It's too far. We won't make it. Please, sir. This is the only light I saw in the storm. This house is our last hope." Her words cut through the air, stronger than the howling wind. The guard opened his mouth to answer, but before he could, a deeper, colder voice spoke from behind him. "What's happening here?" The guard stiffened instantly, spinning around. Standing only a few feet away was the young master himself, the billionaire whose wealth was whispered about in every corner of the city. His tall frame was outlined by the mansion's glow, his dark coat dusted with snow. His eyes, sharp and commanding, scanned the scene before him. The girl froze, her heart thundering in her chest. She hadn't expected anyone so powerful to appear. Her body trembled, not just from the cold now, but from fear. The guard bowed quickly. "Sir, it's nothing. Just a beggar woman. She was asking for shelter. I was sending her away." The billionaire's gaze shifted to the girl. For a moment, time seemed to stop. He took in the torn shawl, the dirt-stained face, the thin arms holding tightly to the child. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes lingered on the baby. The girl's lips trembled. She wanted to speak, but her voice refused to come out. Then somehow she found the strength. "Please, sir," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I am not asking for wealth. I am not asking for food. Just shelter. One night. For my baby. He will die in this storm." The guard looked nervously at his master, waiting for his answer. Everyone knew the billionaire was ruthless in business, a man who never wasted time on weakness. Mercy was not a word anyone used to describe him. The young man stepped closer, his boots crunching in the snow. The girl lowered her head, pressing her face into her baby's blanket. Her body shook as she whispered, "I will leave by morning. You'll never see us again. But please let him live tonight." The billionaire stopped just a few feet away from the gate. His eyes darkened, but not with anger. Something else flickered there, something he himself could not understand. He was used to people begging him for money, for jobs, for chances. But this girl's plea was different. It wasn't for herself. It was for the child in her arms. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Why should I let you in?" he asked, his tone calm but cutting, like a blade sliding through silence. The girl lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. They were swollen from crying, but there was a fire in them. "Because no child deserves to die in the cold," she whispered. "Not even mine. I know I am nothing, but he is innocent. He deserves a chance to live." Her words hung in the air, heavier than the snow. For the first time in a long time, the young billionaire felt something stir deep inside him, a feeling he had long buried beneath walls of wealth and pride. The guard glanced nervously between them. The storm howled louder, as though the night itself was waiting for the billionaire's answer. And though the girl didn't know it yet, her desperate plea at those gates was about to change her destiny forever. The storm raged on, swallowing the night in white chaos. Snow whirled through the air like sharp knives, but the world at the mansion gate stood frozen, locked in silence. The poor girl knelt in the snow, clutching her baby to her chest, her breath weak but her eyes fierce. The guard shifted uncomfortably, waiting for his master's order. And then, He came closer. The young billionaire stepped forward, his tall figure looming against the mansion lights. Every step he took was deliberate, his polished boots sinking into the snow without hesitation. His black coat flared slightly in the wind, and his eyes, sharp as glass, never left the trembling figure before him. Everyone in the city knew his name. He was young, powerful, untouchable. To most, he was a symbol of cold success, a man who built empires but cared for nothing outside of profit. Whispers said he had no heart, that money was the only language he spoke. Yet here he was, walking through the storm toward a poor beggar girl and her child. The girl lowered her head, afraid to meet his gaze. Her heart hammered in her chest. She didn't know if this man would save them or order the guard to throw her into the snow. Still, she held her baby closer, as if shielding him with the little strength she had left. When he finally reached the gate, he stopped. His voice cut through the storm, low and commanding. "What is your name?" The question startled her. For a moment, she couldn't even form words. No one had asked her name in months. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Myra." "Sir?" His eyes narrowed slightly as if weighing her answer. "And the child?" "My son, Eli." Her arms tightened protectively around the bundle. "He's only 6 months." The billionaire's gaze flicked briefly to the child, whose tiny hand peeked out from the blanket. The fingers were blue from the cold. For a second, his jaw clenched, though his expression remained unreadable. The guard shifted nervously. "Sir, shall I send them away?" The young man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked another question, one no one expected. "Why come here?" Myra blinked at him, confused. "I saw the lights," she whispered, her lips quivering. "It was the only place, the only hope left. Please, I don't need food or money, just a roof. One night, I beg you." Her words carried no selfishness, only desperation for her child. They pierced through the icy night, and for the first time the billionaire felt something stir inside him. He had heard thousands of voices plead before, business rivals begging for mercy, workers asking for favors. But this was different. This was raw, real. For a long moment he just stood there staring at the broken girl and the fragile life in her arms. His world had always been about power, numbers, and control. But now, in the middle of a snowstorm, he found himself face to face with something he couldn't measure in money: human suffering. The silence stretched on, broken only by the whimper of the baby. Myra's tears froze on her cheeks as she whispered again, "Please, don't let him die." And then, unexpectedly, the billionaire moved. He stepped closer to the gate, his hand reaching out. The guard gasped as his master himself pushed the heavy iron open, letting the storm rush in. Snow swirled around him, but he stood tall, his coat catching flakes like shards of glass. "Bring them inside," he ordered, his voice calm but firm. The guard's eyes widened in disbelief. "Sir, you heard me." His tone was final, leaving no room for argument. Myra froze, unable to believe her ears. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She had prepared herself for rejection, for cruelty, even for death in the snow. But this was something she had never imagined. The guard quickly moved forward, helping her stand as her weak legs threatened to give way. Myra clutched her baby tightly, her tears now falling freely. She whispered over and over, "Thank you, thank you," though she wasn't even sure the billionaire heard her. As she was led through the gates, her eyes lifted for a brief moment. She caught a closer glimpse of the man who had saved her, a face sharp and handsome but marked by a coldness that life had carved deep. Yet behind those eyes, for the briefest second, she thought she saw something else, something human. The mansion doors opened, spilling warmth and golden light into the night. Myra stepped inside, her body shivering violently as heat wrapped around her for the first time in days. The baby stirred, letting out a soft cry, his little face relaxing as the warmth touched him. Relief flooded her heart, so powerful that her knees nearly gave out again. The servants inside froze in shock. Never before had a stranger been allowed past those doors, let alone a poor beggar girl with a child. They whispered among themselves, eyes wide as the guard explained, but the billionaire said nothing. He removed his gloves slowly, his gaze still locked on the fragile girl who now stood trembling in his home. His heart remained hidden behind his cold mask, but his actions had already spoken louder than words. For Myra, this was no ordinary night. It was the night fate had brought her before a man who could change everything. And for the billionaire, this was no ordinary choice. For the first time in years, he had acted not with logic or profit, but with something far more dangerous. Compassion. Neither of them knew it yet, but this unexpected arrival at the gates would set in motion a story that neither snow, nor wealth, nor the coldest heart could ever stop. The mansion felt like another world. Warm air wrapped around Myra the moment she stepped through the heavy wooden doors. Her frozen fingers tingled as life returned to them, and her baby let out a weak cry that echoed through the vast glowing hall. She clutched him closer, whispering, "You're safe now, Eli. Safe." The marble floor stretched beneath her bare, bruised feet, polished until it shone like glass. A chandelier glittered overhead, scattering light like stars. Servants in neat uniforms paused mid-step, staring at the strange sight of a ragged girl and her infant standing in the grand entrance. None of them dared to speak, but their eyes were filled with shock. The billionaire walked in behind her, removing his snow-dusted coat. His sharp eyes scanned the servants, silencing their whispers without a single word. Everyone lowered their heads instantly, pretending to busy themselves. Power radiated from him, not in loudness but in quiet command. "Get her food, and the child milk," he ordered, his voice steady, cold but controlled. "Yes, sir," one of the maids said quickly, hurrying away. Myra's legs trembled and she swayed where she stood. She hadn't eaten in days, and the warmth was almost too much for her exhausted body. A servant guided her toward a long velvet sofa near the fire. She sat down carefully, her arms still wrapped tightly around Eli. When the flames touched her skin, her tears finally broke free. She tried to wipe them quickly, ashamed to cry in such a place, but she couldn't stop. For so long she had been strong because she had no other choice. Now, in the safety of warmth, her walls cracked. The baby stirred, and when the maid returned with a small bottle of milk, Myra fed him with trembling hands. The child drank greedily, his tiny body shivering less and less as the heat soothed him. Watching her son grow calmer filled her with relief so deep she thought she might collapse. The billionaire stood a few steps away, his expression unreadable. He watched the scene quietly, his hands folded behind his back. He was a man used to numbers, contracts, and power plays. Yet now, for the first time in years, he found himself watching something entirely different. A fragile display of love, stronger than any storm. When Eli finally fell asleep in her arms, Myra looked up at the man who had saved them. Their eyes met, and though her body trembled with fear, she forced herself to speak. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved his life." He said nothing at first. His dark eyes studied her, weighing every word, every movement. Finally, he asked in his low, steady voice, "Why were you in the storm? Where is your family?" The question pierced her like a knife. Her lips quivered, and for a moment she wanted to stay silent. But something about his gaze, sharp yet curious, pushed her to speak. She lowered her eyes to her child and whispered, "I have no family anymore. They left me when I needed them most." Her fingers stroked the baby's cheek as she continued, her voice breaking. "When they found out I was with child, they said I had shamed them. My father said I was no longer his daughter. My mother didn't even look at me. They turned me out with nothing but him." Her arms tightened around Eli, her tears falling onto his blanket. The servants nearby pretended not to hear, but their faces softened with pity. The billionaire, however, remained silent, his expression hidden behind his mask of control. Myra's voice grew softer, more fragile. "Since then, I have walked from place to place. Some nights kind people gave me bread. Most nights, no one opened their doors. I begged, I cried, but people turned away. They said it wasn't their problem. But he..." She looked down at her baby, her voice trembling with fierce love. "He is my world. I cannot give up on him, even if it kills me." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Her words lingered in the air, raw and unpolished, but filled with a truth that no one in the room could deny. The billionaire's jaw tightened. He had heard thousands of stories in boardrooms, tales of struggle, excuses for failure and pleas for mercy. But this was not a performance. This was survival. And it stirred something in him that he had long buried beneath stone walls and iron pride. He stepped closer, his presence heavy, almost overwhelming. Myra looked up nervously, her heart racing. She wondered if he would tell her to leave once the storm passed. Perhaps he would say her story was pitiful but not his concern. Instead, his question surprised her. "What do you want from me?" The room went silent. Even the servants paused, their eyes flicking toward her. Myra's lips parted, but no words came at first. What could she say? She could have begged for food, for clothes, for shelter. She could have asked for gold, for work, for mercy. But when she finally found her voice, it was soft, trembling, yet powerful in its honesty. I don't want your money, she whispered. I don't want anything for myself. All I ask is safety for him, a roof over his head even for one night. That is all. The billionaire's eyes darkened, not with anger but with something else, something even he did not understand. Her truth had cut through his walls, reaching a place he had thought was long gone. The firelight flickered between them, warming the silence. And though Myra didn't know it yet, her truth had done more than save her child for one night. It had planted something dangerous in the heart of a man who had forgotten what it meant to feel. The storm raged outside, but inside the mansion it was a different world. Firelight flickered across the high walls, painting shadows that danced in gold. The thick rugs softened every step, and warmth seeped into every corner as though the cold night had no power here. Myra sat near the fireplace, her baby resting in her arms. Eli's breathing was steady now, no longer shallow, no longer weak. His little fingers curled around her shawl, and his lips pressed together in the quiet peace of sleep. For the first time in weeks, Myra's heart loosened. She let out a trembling sigh of relief, pressing her cheek gently against her son's head. The servants had brought food, a simple bowl of hot soup and bread. To Myra, it felt like a feast. She ate slowly, careful not to disturb the child in her arms. Each bite warmed her from the inside, chasing away the icy grip that had nearly broken her outside those gates. She hadn't tasted real food in days, and every mouthful was a blessing she silently thanked for. From across the room, the young billionaire stood watching. He didn't sit. He didn't speak. His sharp eyes followed her every movement, the way her hands shook as she held the spoon, the way she whispered softly to her child even in her silence, the way her eyes, though tired and swollen from tears, still glowed with a fire that refused to die. He was a man who had seen everything, deals worth millions, men broken by failure, women dressed in diamonds who begged for his attention, but never had he seen someone like her. A girl with nothing who still carried herself with dignity even as she begged for her child's life. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Finally, the billionaire spoke. His voice was calm, yet it carried a weight that made everyone in the room listen. You can stay here tonight. Myra froze, lifting her head toward him. His words felt like a miracle spoken into existence. Her lips parted, but no sound came at first. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling before she could stop them. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling. Thank you, sir. I promise I'll leave at dawn. You won't even know I was here. The billionaire's eyes narrowed slightly as if he didn't like the sound of her promise. But he said nothing more. He simply turned, instructing the servants. Prepare a room. The servants exchanged nervous glances. None of them had ever seen their master allow a stranger, let alone a poor beggar, into his private quarters. Still, they obeyed quickly, rushing to make arrangements. A maid returned, guiding Myra gently through long hallways lit with golden lamps. Her steps faltered on the soft carpet, almost afraid her dirty feet might stain something so grand. Yet the maid smiled kindly, whispering, It's all right. You're safe here. The room they entered was larger than any space Myra had ever known. A canopy bed stood in the center, covered in blankets thicker than anything she had ever touched. Curtains framed tall windows that overlooked the snowy night. A fire already burned in the hearth, filling the room with warmth. Myra stood frozen at the doorway, clutching Eli close. She felt like an intruder, like someone who didn't belong in such a place. Please, I cannot sleep in such a bed, she whispered. The floor is enough, the maid shook her head firmly. The master said you are to rest properly. For the child's sake. Her chest tightened and fresh tears blurred her vision. Slowly she walked to the bed, placing Eli down on the soft sheets. The baby stirred, his tiny body curling into the warmth as he let out a sigh in his sleep. Myra's lips trembled as she pulled the blanket over him. For the first time since his birth, he was lying in a safe, warm bed. She sank to her knees beside him, pressing her hands together in silent prayer. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. Thank you, God, for giving him this chance. Unseen by her, the billionaire stood quietly at the doorway. He had followed, though he hadn't announced himself. His eyes softened slightly as he watched the scene. A mother, worn and fragile, kneeling in gratitude for something so simple. something his world took for granted every day. His chest tightened unexpectedly. He had always believed kindness was weakness, that showing care was a flaw. But in that moment, watching her pray for her child, he wondered if he had been wrong. Later, when the mansion grew quiet, Myra lay beside her baby. The soft bed cradled her. The fire kept her warm, but her heart refused to fully rest. She whispered into the darkness, "Just one night. That's enough. Tomorrow I'll go and no one will chase us again." But sleep claimed her quickly, deeper than she had felt in months. She didn't see the billionaire standing once more at her door, his expression unreadable as he looked in. He lingered longer than he meant to. Something about the girl and her child stirred memories he had buried. Memories of a mother who had once held him in the same way, before life had turned him into stone. Finally, he turned away, walking back into the shadows of his vast, silent home. Yet the image of the poor girl asleep beside her baby would not leave him. Not that night. Not ever. Morning light spilled across the mansion like liquid gold. Outside, the storm had softened, leaving the world blanketed in white. The air was crisp and still, but inside the great house warmth lingered. Myra awoke slowly, her body heavy with exhaustion. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Her eyes fluttered open, and she saw the canopy above her, the soft sheets around her, and the fire still glowing faintly in the hearth. It felt like a dream too kind to be real. Then her gaze fell on Eli. He was curled beside her, cheeks flushed with warmth, his lips forming a tiny smile in his sleep. Relief flooded her heart, so strong that tears filled her eyes again. He had survived the night. Her baby had lived. She leaned over, kissing his forehead gently. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking to God, fate, or the man who had opened his gates to her. A knock sounded on the door. Myra's heart leapt. Before she could answer, the door opened and a servant entered with a tray of food, warm bread, eggs, and milk. "The master requests you join him in the study after you've eaten," the maid said politely. Myra's stomach tightened. Why would he call her? Was he going to tell her to leave? Her hands shook as she fed Eli and nibbled on the bread. The food was delicious, but every bite felt heavy, as though her body knew her future here was uncertain. When she finally gathered her courage, she wrapped Eli in the blanket and followed the maid down long corridors. The mansion was silent, its walls decorated with paintings of ancestors and landscapes. Every step echoed softly against the marble floors, reminding her how out of place she was in this world of wealth. At last, they reached a tall door. The maid bowed slightly, then pushed it open. Myra stepped inside hesitantly. The study was vast, its walls lined with books that reached the ceiling. A fire roared in the fireplace, casting a warm glow over the room. Behind a grand wooden desk sat the billionaire, his posture straight, his gaze fixed on her as though he had been waiting. Her breath caught. Even in daylight, his presence was commanding. His eyes were dark and unreadable, but they pinned her in place, leaving her unable to look away. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. She lowered herself slowly into the chair, clutching Eli tightly to her chest. Her heart thumped like a drum in her ears. For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then he spoke, his voice low and calm. "You said last night you wanted nothing for yourself, only safety for the child." Myra nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. That's all I ask. We will leave as soon as the storm clears." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you think leaving is what's best for him? Out there in the cold with nothing?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Shame burned inside her. He was right. Out there, she had nothing to offer her son. No roof, no food, no future. Still, she whispered, "I cannot stay where I am not wanted. You have already done more for me than anyone else. I will not burden you longer." The billionaire leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the desk. "Tell me the truth, Myra. What do you want from me?" The question struck her like lightning. She looked at him in shock, her mouth dry. What did she want? The answer was both simple and impossible. She wanted safety, warmth, and a chance for her child to grow. She wanted a life where Eli wouldn't suffer as she had. But how could she say that to a man like him? Her voice cracked as she whispered, I want him to live, to grow, to have a chance at life. That is all." The billionaire studied her carefully, his expression unreadable. There was no trace of greed in her words, no hidden agenda, just the raw truth of a mother's love. For the first time, something inside him shifted. He had built his life on deals, on people who always wanted something from him. Power, money, influence. But this girl, she wanted none of it. She wanted only life for her son. He leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening as though he was at war with himself. Then, after a long silence, he asked another question, one that carried weight far heavier than the last. And if I gave you more than one night, if I gave you shelter, food, safety, not just for tonight but beyond, what would you do? Myra's breath caught. She stared at him, unable to believe his words. More than one night? She repeated softly, as though the phrase itself was a miracle. Yes, he said firmly, but answer me honestly. What would you do with such a chance? Her arms tightened around Eli, tears filling her eyes. Her lips trembled as she whispered, I would raise him to be good, to be strong. I would teach him to be grateful for every kindness shown to him. I would make sure he never wastes the gift of life you've given. And I would never forget who saved us. The fire crackled louder as if echoing the power of her words. The billionaire's eyes lingered on her face, on the raw sincerity that no one could fake. He said nothing more, but deep inside, his decision was already forming. A decision that would shock not only Myra but everyone who knew him. For the first time in years, the cold man of steel felt his heart begin to thaw. The study fell into silence after Myra's words. She sat trembling in the chair, clutching Eli close, her heart beating wildly. The fire crackled softly, but the weight of the moment pressed heavier than the storm outside. The young billionaire leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes fixed on her. He had expected greed, expected begging, expected some hidden motive, but instead all she had asked for was life. Life for her son, not for herself. That truth had cut through him more deeply than he cared to admit. He was a man the world called heartless. People feared him, respected him, envied him, but no one truly knew him. He had buried his heart years ago, believing kindness was weakness and love was a luxury he could never afford. Yet here, in his own home, sat a fragile girl who had risked everything in the storm, not for gold or comfort, but for her child's survival. Slowly, he stood. His tall figure cast a long shadow across the firelit room. Myra's breath caught as he walked toward her. She tightened her hold on Eli, unsure if this was the moment he would order her out or the moment her life would change forever. He stopped just in front of her chair. His voice was steady, calm, but carried a weight that filled the room. You said you will leave in the morning. Myra lowered her eyes, her lips trembling. Yes, sir. You've already done more than I deserve. I will not burden you longer. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, he bent slightly, his gaze lowering to the sleeping baby in her arms. Eli's small chest rose and fell in peaceful rhythm, his face softened by warmth and safety. The billionaire's eyes lingered there and something flickered in them, something he had not felt in years. Finally, he straightened and spoke. You will not leave. Myra's head jerked up, her eyes wide. What? You heard me, he said firmly. You and your child will stay here. From this day forward, this house is your home. You will never beg in the snow again. Her mouth opened in shock. Tears spilled instantly down her cheeks. She shook her head in disbelief, whispering, No, I cannot accept this. You don't even know me. I'm no one. Why would you? Because, he interrupted, his voice cutting like steel but softened by something rare. I will not allow an innocent child to suffer when I have the power to prevent it. His words thundered through her heart. She clutched Eli tighter, her tears falling freely. But sir, I can give you nothing in return. The billionaire's jaw tightened. I did not ask for anything in return. What you have already given. His eyes locked on hers, and for a brief moment the mask of coldness cracked, revealing something human, something wounded yet alive. Is a reminder that not all value can be counted in money. Her lips trembled as she whispered, You are saving us. For the first time, his gaze softened. No, he replied quietly. Perhaps you are saving me. The room grew still. Even the fire seemed to quiet, as though listening to the words neither of them had expected. Myra bowed her head, tears flowing like rivers. She wanted to fall to her knees to thank him until her voice gave out, but her baby stirred in her arms, reminding her that her strength was needed. She whispered instead, Thank you. I swear I will never forget this, never. The billionaire turned away, hiding the storm inside him. To the outside world, he would remain the same cold, powerful man, but inside something had shifted forever. A poor girl's plea had touched the one place he thought was long dead, his heart. Later, when the servants heard of his decision, they whispered in shock. No stranger had ever been welcome to stay in the mansion, not even wealthy friends or distant relatives. Yet this fragile girl and her child had been given shelter, not just for a night but for life. Some called it madness. Others said the master had finally gone soft. But none dared question him openly. His word was law, and his word had been clear. They would never be cast out again. That evening, Myra walked the halls of the mansion with Eli cradled against her. For the first time in her life, she did not feel like a beggar or an outcast. She felt safe. She felt seen. She pressed her lips to her child's forehead, whispering, "You will grow. You will live. You will never know the cold the way I did." From the balcony above, the billionaire watched quietly. His face was unreadable, but his heart, though he would never admit it, felt lighter than it had in years. The world outside remained harsh, the snow deep and merciless. But inside the mansion, a new story had begun. A story of survival, of hope, and of an answer so unbelievable it would change their lives forever.